Okay, everybody, so welcome and thank you for attending this panel discussion on issues related to women in football. The idea this afternoon really is that we try to get under the skin of some of the big issues that relate to women in football, both the playing side, the development of the game, where the opportunities are, how far we've come in the development of women's football. That will come later on with my colleague Raluca Negulescu. But for the moment, we start with this session, moderated by me, Paola, on some of the policy issues around leadership of women in football and sport generally. And we have a colleague who will join us in terms of explaining some of the research work that's been done in this area. So if I can introduce the panel, on my far left is Paola Ottonello, who is a policy officer at the sport unit in the European Commission from Brussels. Thank you for joining us, Paola. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And next to me is Caitlin Fisher, who is truly a very, very interesting person. She played in the US as a professional soccer player, also in Sweden. She is based in Berlin and is now also a board member of the FIFPro Women's Committee, and so is involved in representing players, developing FIFPro policy on the issue of women in football. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
By Skype, we're joined by my colleague Jacco van Sterkenburg from Erasmus University. Now, Jacco is an assistant professor at Erasmus who is in the, I think he's the assistant professor in the media and communications unit. Jacco, have I got that right? Can we hear from you?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, thanks, Priara. Hi, everyone.
And Jacco's research focus is on race, media, and sport. And he was involved a few years ago in a big research project that we commissioned jointly with UEFA to look at the issue of glass ceilings in football, which partly covered the issue of women in leadership positions. So Jacco has some hard data for us. And I think if I can start, though, with Paola, in terms of the European Commission and some of the policy challenges that you think we face in terms of an overall framework for women in football, women's sport generally. Where are we? Where do you think are the successes that we've made in terms of putting women's football and women's sport on the top of a sporting agenda? And what are the challenges that we have coming up in the coming years?
Well, there are certain challenges because we're not there yet, that's for sure. I think if we look at the way, let's put it this way, the way we look at we work at the European Commission, we have a sort of policy framework, and then attached to that we have some financing opportunities and programs opportunities. So we try to put our funding in a way that supports our policies. And when we talk, this is important because of course that also means that we can potentially fund projects that relates to women and sport, for example, women in football. The way, when we talk about women in sport, we have certain specific challenges, and women in leadership is certainly one of them. I would say even probably number one in many ways, because if you change the governance of sport organizations to make it more gender equal, then probably chances are that will then kickstart some further changes along the way. We also look at women participation in sport, so not just football, but in general, and we know, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything new, that women and girls tend to stop playing sport more so than boys. And so it's important to see why that happens. And then we look at things like women in coaching. That is also another angle that you can further equality. We look at women in the media and how they are portrayed and what kind of role models are there or are not there sometimes. And we also look at what we call gender-based violence, so violence within a sport environment. In terms of In terms of participation, I'm sure you're all familiar, for example, with the recent campaign that UEFA has launched, that we are very happy to support. And I think, in a way, these are the kind of examples that are out there, because at the European Commission level, we can do a lot in terms of dialogue with countries, dialogue with sport organizations, but we are still in the realm of soft policy. We are in no position to dictate, and it shouldn't be like that, of course. You know, sport is independent. Why should we be dictating? But at the same time, it's important to keep it high in the agenda and to make sure that there is a general awareness there. But of course, if then you have big organizations like UEFA doing their part to try and further equality, then that always helps. But in terms of where are the best practices, and in a way I'm waiting for you to tell me, because it's, you're the ones on the ground, you're the ones that should flag to me, what are the best practices that we could help share among different countries. You probably know better than me, from your own experience, from your organizations, what works and what doesn't. And also you're in a better position to tell me what we could do to help, if anything.
Okay, thank you for that. That's an open invitation that I'm sure we'll take up. So from your point of view, you are putting some priorities at the EU level, yes, persuading governments and sport organizations to make sure that they're delivered.
Yes.
And already you're talking about the UEFA campaign and other campaigns that are following the UEFA campaign in terms of encouraging more women and girls to play football.
Yes.
Now, I think you also mentioned that leadership was a big issue for you.
Yes.
It's certainly a big issue for us. And a few years ago, there was some really interesting hard data that came out that Jacco, hopefully you can tell us a little bit about. You were part of a small team that looked at women in leadership roles across European football. Could you give us a quick summary of some of your findings, some of the reasoning that some of the analysis behind the data that you found?
Yes, of course, I can do that. So the thing is, we did this research with mainly with Steve Bradbury, right, commissioned by FAIR. Results show, the hard data show basically that in senior governance, but also senior operations, as well as in coaching, that the vast majority of persons in leadership positions are males. Not surprisingly, perhaps, if we watch football now and then. However, so let's say about when it's about senior governance, less than 4% in Europe, European football clubs, but also within UEFA and national associations, less than 4% is female. With senior operations, it's a bit better. So then it's about 88 or 89% being male, which means that around 10% is female within senior operations. But this also shows that the higher up the hierarchy, so the higher up in the organization, and when it comes to senior governance, it's especially males, right? So you can look at the data, but you should also probably look at the specific positions in terms of power, and then you can see that yes, there are, let's say, women in leadership positions, but not really the higher up you get. It's mainly male, and in the coaching positions also it's mainly males, even within the women football clubs and even within the women football national teams, right? So even there, it's mainly males who are coaching and who are in leadership positions.
So your findings are, just to quickly summarize, about 10% of the executive leadership positions in football are taken by women. And then when it comes to political positions, it's more like 3%, something like that. And part of the trends that you've identified is that even within women's football, you have a lack of women as coaches, as senior coaches, as the head coaches of some of the teams in professional women's football.
Yes, no, that's a good summary of the data that we did in that research, and recent data in my own country, the Netherlands, kind of confirmed this trend. Also there, right now, basically at this point. So, I think the data show this consistent pattern, kind of.
And what about, in terms of the reasoning behind some of this, what is it? Are women not putting themselves forward? Are women not qualified for these roles? Or are they simply being excluded?
Well, the thing is that indeed you're right. I mean, let's say the hard data are very important, I think, to also show policymakers the problem. However, it's only the symptom. So you should basically look at the underlying mechanisms and processes, and then you come to the question that you're asking, like, what kind of reasons are there behind, let's say, the figures? And that's a variety of reasons. I would say that putting the blame, let's say, on the women and the fact that they may not be taking initiative, that is I would say, too simplistic, and it doesn't take into account the football structure. And I think it's important to take into account the football structure, which means that certain positions are still associated very much with women, which means that if women are in leadership positions, it's mainly in terms of marketing, communication, but not, let's say, in the real senior governance positions, because they are associated mainly with men, which means that if you want to be in that position as a woman, you have to kind of, fight the stereotypes and kind of fight, the structure in a way. And that's just part of the reasoning, right? I mean, it's also the network, which you are not, as a woman, which you're not automatically part of. It's still a man's network. And when people are being recruited, they search for other people in their network, which are mainly male. So that those kind of factors, contribute to these figures.
And some of the recommendations that you made were focused on the governing bodies. The impetus is for organizations to understand the opportunity that exists and for them to make the changes, create the changes. I think in the first, the research was done in 2 tranches, and the first tranche led to UEFA co-opting a woman onto the executive committee. Is that the sort of thing that you found makes a difference? Is that the way to go?
Yeah, I see your point. Well, I think, yes, it does make a difference. So I know people can be also skeptical about that, but the thing that I just mentioned a moment ago, that leadership positions must be associated at some point also with women, right? And having women in such leadership roles can help. The thing is that it should be real leadership, not only symbolic, but it should lead to something, right? It should be a long-term process, and then that's still the question whether that will take place. But I do indeed think that in order to challenge these networks and to let's say to change the networks and to challenge the stereotypes, yes, it is a good start, at least, to take these measures to also have women on the board, on the senior governance board.
Thank you. Now, Caitlin, you as a former player, you are the sort of person who really we're looking for to come forward in administration or indeed in coaching. I mean, this idea that the trend that has emerged that women's teams at the top level are recruiting men to be the head coaches rather than bringing women through, former players like yourself, people who are qualified. What's your response to that? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a huge challenge. This is something that we're talking about a lot at FIFPro, of figuring out how to integrate women's football, the women's game, female players into existing structures, so into management and into membership. And there's no easy answer. We're basically, taking the perspective of you got to work top down, you got to look at the policies, you got to look at the structures, the statutes. How can we work with our member unions to change some of their statutes to include female players, even in places where female players are amateur status? We're talking about professional, but in the process, so looking at kind of temporary measures that we can do as part of the process. But at the same time, bottom up. So it's, we're thinking about these statutes, but as Billie Jean King says, which I love, you got to change hearts and minds to match the legislation. That it's got to be organizational culture, it's got to be built in. You've got to be thinking about, the deeper structural issues, as we heard from our colleague here, but how to get this into people's hearts and minds, how to really start thinking culturally and make everyone in organizations, in teams, take responsibility for this. This is not just about a diversity committee or thinking about, gender priorities as one segment, or that this is a women's issue. this isn't. So how, and again, there's no easy way, but how to really embed this into the deeper culture of teams and organizations. And I think, it will take time, it will take patience, but we also can't sit around and wait. That we do have to take action and think about what are these specific, particular targeted measures that we can do in the time being, which I think quotas are one of these, that we absolutely need these. This is about representation, this is about getting visibility, this is about getting voice in certain positions of leadership. It doesn't necessarily mean that women's voices are going to be recognized or that women's issues are going to be heard. And if you're just creating a seat at the table and the table stays the same, what does that actually do? But we need to think about them as temporary measures and as the minimum. So we can say we need 30% critical mass of women on a board, but at the end of the day, if that's seen as the maximum, not the minimum, and we just get complacent with that, also it's, what's that doing? So I think we just need to be thinking critically about all of these measures and these policies, these structures, these statutes, everything, the commitment we're doing kind of at the discursive level, and then how this aligns simultaneously with what we're doing and what we're building in the pipeline, how we're thinking of opportunities, how we're challenging this really subtle gender bias, even in terms of recruitment and retention of what language is used in job descriptions. How are we talking about, even imagery, we talk about this a lot within FIFPro, on websites of our member unions, that you go on to the website and you see all male players in the photos, and it's like, what female player, I'm not gonna join a union that doesn't have a female player, something that I feel represents me, why would I ever join? So simple little things like that or seem little, but they're enormous in terms of representation are really important.
And from your perspective, from FIFPro and as an ex-player, there is the appetite amongst women players to take these roles on. Let's be clear about that, right? People want to move from playing into coaching, they want to get involved in the mainstream structures in their FAs, and take on those leadership roles.
Absolutely, 100%. I have a great example. One of my former teammates, I actually played pro in Brazil as well for Santos. And one of my former teammates, Aline Pellegrino, who was captain of Brazil for 8 years, we retired around the same time, and she got offered a coaching job up in Recife, Pernambuco, where I had also been playing. And she took over as head coach. She was coach for a couple months before stepping down. And this was her dream. She wanted to coach professional women's football in her country, and she wanted to do this. But she actually felt like when given this position, that she had very little agency in the ultimate decision-making process, that there was a whole series of men who had been in the club for a long time before her, who were making the ultimate decision. So she would say, we need this, or I need this for my assistant coach, or this is the facility we need, and ultimately wouldn't get it because there was other decision-making happening behind her. And so she relinquished the role and said, I can't do this. But the demand, the desire, it's all there. We just got to look at what structures are preventing it from really happening.
Jacco, if I can come back to you. During the research, you did a series of interviews, and some of the interviews were of women in leadership positions. Was this sort of experience quite common, that people are given an opportunity, they take the opportunity, but then realize actually the foundations for them are not there? That in fact it's not a real opportunity. They're there, if you like, to make up the numbers rather than to be appreciated as a leader.
Yes, I think that females within leadership roles in football do experience this. Actually, a very recent example from the Netherlands is also that one female ex-international player who had played for the Dutch team. She went to the Dutch Royal Football Association to take this leadership role, especially related to women's football. But she already left after 2 years. For a variety of reasons, but part also was that there is this organizational culture which is difficult to work with, and that of course is very important to look at. I mean, I very much agree with the last speaker that it should not only be in the documents, it should not only be in the writing that football associations say that diversity is important, but it should also be in the doing, right? And that is that's still, let's say, lagging behind in a way. And in the doing, I mean with that it should be in the way women really get a voice and really get the power also to make decisions, right? And that's still, there's still some work to do there.
Now, Caitlin, you mentioned quotas. We can talk about sort of quotas as in the Norwegian context, for example, they impose quotas, or you can talk about positive action, which is short of quotas, but pushing people forward. There's general agreement, is there general agreement in the room that that is the way to go, that is the only way that we can really address some of the underrepresentation that we see? This is often one of the most debated points. You know, that a lot of men say, why should we have women or other or minorities imposed on us? We should be doing this in a way which is more organic. But then if you open it up, the organic development doesn't occur. So generally, I think the feeling here is that reserved places or positive discrimination or positive action, which are all three different things, is the way to go. Paola, in terms of the Commission, I mean, obviously you said you don't dictate down to states or to federations on this sort of stuff, but what is your policy perspective?
Well, we don't have a policy on quota. I think what I've seen in the years that I've been talking to people and talking to organizations, I've seen a return to quotas and positive action, a return of interest, especially from people who have been working in the field for years and who don't see the changes happening fast enough. So people who, women who would, 10 years ago would have said, no, I don't believe in quotas because I want to get there out of my own merit and not because I am a woman, would now say, well, you know what, let's start with the quotas, let's start with getting women there. You could even say that the woman candidate might not be the best, maybe for a few years, but as you said, probably as a temporary measure. But it's part of the change in culture. Once you start getting women out there, and not just in the Women's Commission, not just in the communication role, like really give a sort of a really real role, then the changes might occur faster. Now, there is no, from our point of view, there is no solution or no easy answer, also because we are faced at European level with huge differences among countries. Yeah. So, and huge cultural differences. So what might work in certain countries doesn't necessarily work in others, for a start. Mm-hmm. Certain countries are way up there compared to others. So when we are talking here and saying it's not enough to have women on the charts, to have principles and ideas in paper, we need to act on them. You can also say that in certain countries it will already be a start to have equality and to have women mentioned in the statutes, for example. So it's really a challenge because you're talking widely different starting points. So I'm afraid that there's no magic solution there.
Now, a few years ago, the Commission, the sport unit, did some work. There was a meeting in Vilnius, yes. I think, actually specifically on this issue.
Yes.
On the idea of the states coming together that are interested in encouraging activity on breaking glass ceilings.
Yes.
What's the follow-up from that? What's your general direction of travel?
We've carried on the work. It's progressing slowly. Partly also because, as I said, we have different levels in different countries. The follow-up to that was that last year, so the way we work, we have sort of policy orientations that are part of a diplomatic exercise by all the member states. And for the years 2014, 2017, there was an expert group on good governance, which was one of the main policies for us, which included a gender element. And this expert group looked at that document that you're talking about, that came out of the Vilnius conference, and tried to go further and say, okay, we have this document that comes out of certain experts in the field that have come up with recommendations and with percentages, really there were targets. What can we then do as member states and as sport organizations, because the member states are members of the group, but sport organizations are we call them observers, but in actual fact they're part of the discussion. And they came up with a series of recommendations on gender equality in sport, and there is a specific part on leadership. Of course, the challenge for us is that we don't, you know, for us, the big principle is that of independence of sport organizations. So we can give ideas and we can give recommendations, but at the end of the day, the sport organizations have to own these recommendations and have to act on them themselves. Sure. So that's a bit the challenge. Sure. But by all means, it's one of the main issues.
Okay, so if we perhaps look a bit wider, generally in terms of sport policy, from the European Commission, you've been very clear. Caitlin, what's your perspective in terms of what you're seeing from the international governing bodies and the leadership that they're giving? Every year we see FIFA now holds an annual gathering on International Women's Day in Zurich on issues related to women and women in football. And leadership is often a big part of that. We've seen many of those big reports from McKinsey & Co., PwC, big management consultancies who prove the case for diversity in leadership, female leadership, gender leadership, and also ethnic diversity in leadership. What's your feeling in terms of how that message is being taken on?
Yeah, I think it's positive. I think it's happening. It's been the case for women in leadership and gender diversity on boards and governance has been being made for several years now, and it looks like sporting bodies and federations are getting on board slowly, kind of as this last leg of it. So I think this is good. This is progress. It looks like it's happening. But again, what does this all mean? I mean, it's great, you know, with FIFA now changing to having 6 out of 36 on the executive committee now, 6 women that are part of it. But I think that we can easily lose sight. I mean, it is important to, first of all, just think that diversity, as you said, diverse perspectives and experiences on any board in any governing structure in any organization is valuable, that this can make us better, this can make football better, this can make our decision-making process, transparency, accountability, we know this, and it's proven, as you said, in all of these reports that are out there, the data is there. So we're getting there, we're getting on board with this, but we need to keep thinking critically about it, of, you know, what does this diversity mean? And if we're talking about gender diversity, let's also not lose sight of diverse experiences in terms of age, region, ethnicity, etc., that are also important on it. And also not to think, you know, of essentializing women as we have the one token woman, but the diversity of women as well. And we look within categories of diversity and break those down as well. So how are we thinking about this? And as you said as well, that we have this case for gender diversity that we can talk about in terms of, and we should be talking about, in terms of rights and in terms of addressing discrimination and a long history of discrimination. But if that doesn't get you, there is of course also this business case. And it's like, you know, the numbers are out there to show that become more effective, more innovative, that, you know, that you can be better as an organization, and business-wise there's a case. That shouldn't be the first argument, but if the rights-based case doesn't get you, there's another reason. So yeah, we need to keep it.
I mean, one of the things, in terms of the policy area, one of the things that always strikes me is that there's a lot of focus on getting young girls and then women of an older age active because of the health benefits, because of the benefits, for example, for social inclusion. But then that's not often followed through in terms of giving them responsibility for projects. We often see projects for young women defined by men. We often see the federations led by men saying, we're going to do something for women here. It's a sort of top-down approach. Again, how do we begin to change that? Do you have mechanisms, funding mechanisms, policy directives that we can bring to bear to change that setup?
No. For the reason that I explained later, that for in terms of sport, it's more of a soft policy. So it's more about keeping these issues on the agenda and making sure that in our policy dialogues with sport organizations we keep talking about it. However, one of the main priorities for sport in general at commission level is grassroots sports, and that also means, you know, in terms of gender equality, really trying to work on the little club, the local football association, really the neighborhood club even. And this is part of the strategy to work not only top down but bottom up as well, because you could argue that if you start getting women active in your local football club, then a percentage of these women hopefully will then move on and will then not only become professional players but also hopefully take an interest in the administration. Again, there is no magic solution, and I don't have specific example of how that can transfer in terms of governance, but I think that inevitably we have to take in parallel the two approaches, sort of top down and bottom up, and hope that they meet in the middle at some point.
Is there a country where there's a lot of work going on in this area that you're following within the EU member states?
Not specifically. I think
you're being diplomatic now, aren't you?
I am being diplomatic. We have to look at all the countries. So I think inevitably there are certain countries. I mean, you have the stereotypical of the northern countries that are much more advanced, but it doesn't mean that they have arrived. You know, if they have near equality, that's still not equality, so there's still work. You know, you can argue that there's still work to do regardless of where you start from. So I can't say that I've seen certain countries do more work than others or better work than others. I think it really depends on individual cases and the individual situations of individual clubs. But for sure, there are countries where at least it's a political priority is more so than in others.
Sure.
And that's a bit our challenge, to try and sort of make everyone move forward.
Sure. Jacco, in your experience from your research, which region of Europe or which countries specifically do you think are ahead in this area?
Oh, that's, well, the research we did, and the research I did recently for the Netherlands, shows that if we take another dimension, ethnicity, then, for instance, England is ahead of the others. But I'm not so sure if that's the same with gender. Well, you probably know this better than I do. But the sensitivity towards issue of equality they're more on the agenda in some countries, like northwestern countries, northwestern Europe, than on some of the others. I have that impression. However, to really know for sure, yeah, of course, I would have to do like comparative research, including also East European countries and also the dynamics behind the numbers. And I just don't know that specifically for those countries. But the figures, etc., and what I know from my own expertise is that the Northwest European countries are ahead of, let's say, South European, East European countries, yes, in that respect.
Okay, thank you. Now, just a slightly different tack. Someone sent us in a question by Facebook, Sonia Laila, who I think touches on an interesting point, which is, why do we not see more women's football on TV? Now, I think there's an obvious answer to that, but do you think the lack of visibility, the lack of equality between, or even the lack of planning of, in terms of bringing women's football up to a level playing field with men's football, is part of the process of undermining women's role within the game? It is a men's game. The coaches are men. The leaders are men. Women are struggling to find a place. I don't know what you think of that, Caitlin, particularly in terms of developments in the US, China, Japan, Germany, the big countries where women's football is successful.
So the question, the visibility issue?
Yes.
Like
and
how do
how
we
that
address it?
leads into leadership and how we address it.
Yeah, I mean, it's essential. Visibility is essential, and it is something that we see, a lack of visibility, that you can't turn on the television in most countries and watch a women's football game, or even to know when it's on. And if it is, it's probably at dawn. Absolutely, it's kind of, we talk about this a lot in terms of like the chicken, the egg, where do you start? It's not on television. Why? There's no investment. Why? There's no sponsors. Why? There's not media attention. Why? There's not fans. Why? You can keep going, and then where do you insert? And at the end of the day, it does come down to saying, this vicious cycle will keep going and it won't turn virtuous unless there is will. There has to be will of individuals, of governing bodies, of organizations, of people stepping up, of leaders, of organizations stepping up and saying, no, we're going to change this. That we are going to step in, we're going to intercept this vicious cycle, and we're going to change this. And it requires, putting money in where you're not going to get a return on investment right away. It requires seeing the long-term picture, and requires seeing that this is not going to happen overnight. But it's also a belief that we want to see this happen, that we care about this, that we care about women's football, and it has to start somewhere. And visibility is one of the biggest places. We talk a lot about it within FIFPro and the union of visibility, voice, and value. That these three, how do you create increase visibility? How do you create space for voice to be heard of female players, and value in a way that is genuine and true to what the women's game and players represent? So, yes, we need to be able to turn on the television and watch women's football.
Visibility, voice, value. I like the continuum there. That's a good way to put it. Paola, we've had another question in through social media, which is very specific. How is the European Commission encouraging its member states to deal with unconscious bias? That may be too specific, but generally this idea that we're carrying prejudices that we have to confront, or they affect decision making.
Yes, it's a very difficult question. I think we go back to the fact that we need to keep talking about it, and we need to keep raising the issue and I think at the moment, for example, one of the trendy topic, if you want, is good governance. And I think we must not forget that when we talk about good governance and when we talk about the good backbone of an organization, gender and equality should really have a really strong position in that. And I think that's the way we are doing it at the moment. We are kind of trying to link the two, and it's really difficult because it goes back to culture, whether it's the culture of the organization or whether it's the culture of a country. It goes back to that, and unfortunately you can't change a culture overnight. You have to it's kind of like the dripping effect. You have to slowly get there. But I think that's probably the best that we can do, and it links also with, like you were saying, about the visibility of sport, because I think until we can really have specific role models up there, and until we can really see what women are capable of, there will always be a percentage of the population that doesn't fully buy in, and will continues to prefer maybe men's football to that. And in the UK, for example, they've done an amazing job in terms of raising the profile of women's football, and it is by investing and accepting that, like you were saying, that in the short term you may not have a direct return on investment, but that there are values behind this choice, but there is also an economic value in thinking that you will increase your fan base, you will increase the players, and that there is an economic case for that as well.
Okay, so as we come to towards the end of this part of the discussion, please have a think about two things that you'd want to happen to change the situation from the status quo into one that's more equitable. But before I ask you that, if there's anyone in the audience who has a question or a point to make, please feel free. Jacco, I wanted to talk to you about the role of the media as it stands in terms of reinforcing the exclusion of women and the profile in terms of leadership and the way women are seen, firstly. But secondly, the way in which new media deals offer opportunities. For example, in the last year or so, we've seen Twitter coming into the sports media market we know that Facebook will soon be live streaming sports matches. I saw last week that Amazon will be in the media market. Does this opening up provide more opportunities for content from, women's football, for example, that widens the base, creates new heroes, and allows that visibility that we've been talking about?
Yeah, so let me first say about the mainstream media, because that was your first remark. I think how that would perhaps deserve attention. Well, I think within mainstream media, to start with very briefly, the same problem applies as we just discussed with football leadership. So what you see, we have the Football European Championships, the Women's Championships soon coming up in my country, the Netherlands. And what you see is that the leadership within football media are also males, also in relation to women's football, right? So the people working as journalists, working as, let's say, the editorial chiefs, they are males and they have to cover the Women's European Championships. And what you see is that they consider it mainly as an event that they have to cover, but it's not really, in their eyes at least, it's not really a sport event, not an elite sport event. This would be completely different with the men's European Championship, right? So, I mean, the leadership positions within mainstream media also deserve attention, just like we just discussed in terms of football leadership generally, right? So that's my first, let's say, point to make about mainstream media. Then when it comes to social media, I would say yes, it's very important, especially for women's football, because I would say that social media for many, let's say, audiences, for many young people as well, social media is their first screen. It's what they mainly use. For men's football, it's television, which people mainly use. But television doesn't show women's football that much and that often. So social media is very important. Live streaming is very important. Social media is very important to give voice to women. So in that sense, social media can be a very important tool. And I think that football associations, national football associations, can stimulate social media and try to build a community, a women's football community around that. And I think there is something to win there. However, I'm not completely optimistic only about social media, because we know that social media also at the same time can reinforce many of the stereotypes, right? And there will be weblogs treating women's football as not the real thing, right? That will happen also. So there's also that side to it, right? So it's ambiguous, but I think there is potential there, yes.
Okay, thank you. So if you can also think about the two things that you would change. In the meantime, we've had a question, or I would say someone making a point backing up what you said earlier on about lack of visibility from Mexico. Diosas Olímpicas says, we are about to start our own women's league in a part of Mexico, and we're looking around at how we can get visibility for it, and it's very, very difficult. My colleague Gibor Dean in Hungary says that we should talk about, always not just talk about women playing, but also talk about their role in other positions, such as sports commentating. That's an issue for him when he wants to see more sports commentators. So Paola, in terms of the two things that you think could make a real difference if there were action, whether it's by you or by others, federations, NGOs, other actors, what would they be, do you think?
For me, the visibility is certainly probably one of the highest up there, because we are talking about changing cultures, and this has to be one of the first ones.
So do everything we can to increase visibility.
To increase visibility, exactly, and to show people who don't know yet how great women's football can be, for example, and that I think is absolutely crucial in then creating a virtuous cycle as opposed to the vicious cycle of as another entry point for change. I don't think there is one or two things that would make a difference. I think it's really a question of getting at it from different angles and from different perspectives until we reach our desired goal. And it ties in a bit with what we were saying about social media. I mean, social media can be a great opportunity. The risk, of course, is that you talk to kindred spirits. So, you know, that you sort of you keep following each other and you keep talking about the things that matter to us, which happen to be women in sport, but you don't necessarily break the silo and to a wider audience.
Okay. Jacco, are there two things from your research experience that you think could make a real change here in this area?
Well, one of the things, but perhaps it's rather abstract, but what should be on the agenda is, I think, that there should be let's say, a more inclusive definition of what quality means, right? And this is quality in terms of sport leadership, but also quality in terms of media leadership. And it means that what I hear very often when I do interviews with policymakers within football, but also with media professionals, what they tell me is, we are recruiting the best people for the job. And if those people are only white males, for instance, then that's how it is, right? Then that is the best people. My point would be, diversity is part of that quality criteria. So you cannot see quality as independent from diversity. But still, very often it is seen as independent. So quality is seen as independent from diversity. And I think that should change, and it should be on the agenda. For instance, in editorial board meetings within the media, and this should be stimulated somehow. But the difficult thing here is how to do this. So therefore I say it's rather an abstract thing, but I think it's very important to make this cultural shift. And then the second thing in the end is about giving voice to marginalized groups, and we're talking about women very much, and that's important, but it's also about ethnic minority women and also about majority women, right? If we take the figures, the football leadership figures within Europe, we see that ethnic minority women, there's well, nobody almost, right? So the intersection of ethnicity with gender also deserves more attention, because it is there that the problem, I would say, is in a way most urgent, because there's no one, and role models. We do need role models also there, right? So that's an important issue to kind of conclude with from my side.
Thanks for that, Jacco, and for introducing this idea of intersection, which is going to be picked up in the next session. Caitlin, what are the two things from you? I'm looking for something really radical here. Blow us away.
Well, it's tied into what I said before, but in thinking specifically, and kind of all three of them are tied together, again, around visibility, value, and voice, but really thinking investment, so resources, putting the resources in to create access and opportunities. And this at the level of the grassroots level, so thinking about development of young players and opportunities for young girls to play, but also access and opportunities for professional female players today, which is something that often gets overlooked unless we're talking about kind of players' rights and from the union perspective, but of professional players today and women in the game that are trying to compete at an elite level, and to be able to say that we have access and opportunities to stable jobs as a professional footballer in this country, in this place, and that it's there. This is a feasible job opportunity for me to be as a woman in football. So I think those two sides of thinking access to opportunities, and you can only do that if you really are thinking about incorporating the voices of the players and others at the grassroots in this. So how do we increase this access? Well, we have to know what the issues are. We have to understand where to even direct these resources, and you can only do that by including these voices. So that on one side, and then I want to take it back to the visibility piece, because I think this is key, but it's also really essential of how we think about visibility, and this also ties into what the comment from Mexico came in about how do we increase visibility, and this is always a challenge. This is something that we experience in Brazil as well, playing there. And it can very easily kind of slide into a space of, okay, we're increasing visibility in order to, garner larger audience and increase the amount of people in the stadium and get more people coming to games. But how are we doing that, and how are we increasing the visibility? It can very easily slip into this place of kind of beautification of the women's game and this hyper-feminization. So this depiction and this portrayal that oftentimes can be very problematic around kind of objectifying the female body, and thinking of this in terms of commodification as well, that this, yes, absolutely can create value, but what type of value? And how are we actually portraying the women in the game? And players in the game in general, but more specifically, how are we creating that visibility? We need to constantly be asking ourselves that as we try to generate value.
That's a very good point to finish on, I think, and it also reminds me of a comment that Sepp Blatter once made about women's football, which was that, yes, we need to see more women playing football in tight shorts. That was the extent of his analysis of the benefits of women's football. The women in tight shorts was the thing that he wanted to see. And I think that, at that point, showed us the distance that we had to travel. Thankfully, I think we've come a little bit further, but there's a very, very long way to go. Now, I think at this stage, I want to hand over to my colleague, Raluca Negalescu, who is going to pick up some of these issues about development, playing, and the intersections. Raluca.
Hello, everyone. I think I'll be able to make a perfect transition to a topic that is very complex, and I'm very excited to have a panel with people that have very diverse experiences connected to grassroots women's and girls football. So I'm very happy to invite by my side Ayisat Yusuf, former Nigeria international and member of the FAIR Network board. Hi. Also, I'm inviting in the panel from Discover Football, where they're doing an amazing job, Friederike Faust. And because we were talking about diversity and grassroots experience, I'm very excited also to have by our side Vladimir Dolgiy-Rapoport. I hope I read that right. And he's here from Girls Power Football Academy from Russia, and his colleague Anna joined us. She will help with the translation. Okay. And we're very excited also to have in our panel Shireen Ahmed. Welcome, Shireen. You are with us online. And Shireen has an extensive experience in women's football as a player, coach, and sports activist. And we are looking forward to hear your understanding of the issue. So what we will try to do is look a bit at grassroots experience in girls and women's football, and to map a bit the prerequisites of women's football development in the next years. In different countries, we have different levels of development. And I know that your personal stories are very inspiring, and that's why I'm starting with Ayisat, who has this experience also from the Nigerian perspective and Finland perspective. And I would like to ask you to tell us a bit of your journey and how you see football development, women's football development, and what's your take on this issue.
Thank you very much. Actually, I started my football back home in Nigeria when I was very young, and though then it was really difficult because then there was not much women playing football, and I don't have enough support from my parents because it's kind of like football is meant for the boys and kind of sexism, kind of no gender equality, and it's even a bit difficult because I came from a Muslim background, so it's like I have a limit to what I can do when it comes to football. And most of the time when I go for training, because back in the days then I used to train with the boys in my community, so when I go for training, anytime I come back after the training, I get punished for that. But I keep persisting and I keep doing what I know how to do best because I've got great passion for the run ladder, which I really want to play. But anyway, like after some years, I had a breakthrough when I played my first World Cup, and that was in 2002 in Canada. And then the story changed from grass to grace because that was my breakthrough. And then, you know, it was a big thing for my family. I wouldn't see their daughter playing in the World Cup, and the story really changed my community because when I came back from the tournament, it was different entirely. And I remember then the first story they wrote about me in the magazine then was like, Ayisat was flogged for playing football, now she's a star. So, and that gave most of the parents in my community to allow their daughters to play football because they see that I had a breakthrough. But sometimes I keep thinking about this, that, okay, what about if I never had this breakthrough? and then what would have happened? For me, I think that would have shattered my dream as someone that loves to play football and being a girl that want to really do what I know how to do best. And afterward, I keep playing and play for the play 3 different World Cup and won the 3 times African gold medalist. And I was at the Olympic Beijing in China. So, having said this, and I played in the Finnish league for like 6 years in Finland with different cities and different clubs, which really motivated me and it gave me an edge in my country. And also, I try to use that to encourage most people most girls that want to play football, because for me, I think it's good to try to encourage someone or to help people that, and I mean, I'm talking about like if any girls or women want to play football, it's good for people to give them opportunities, and most especially the parents, to support their daughters to do what they want to do. Because sometimes when you deprive a girl from a ball, like you can do this, you can do that because you are gay and stuff like that, you never know what will come after that. So the thing is that when I played in Finland and played in Nigeria, it was different entirely, because like in Finland it was quite different. Like they have good field and good team, and I got some motivation, I got some connection, some link and all that. But at the same time, now football, I'm so happy because women football now has really grown really fast. Because I watched most of the World Cup now, like the previous World Cup in Canada, it was massive. The tournament was superb. The player played like very entertaining football, which I believe like FIFA and other regional level and national level should put more commitment, more support, more encouragement for women, and most especially the grassroots. Because for me, I believe when you are playing football, like from the grassroots, using football as a platform to help other young girls that want to play football without any discrimination or any gender equality to deprive you of doing what you know how to do best. So that's all I have to say for now.
Thank you very much. This is very inspiring, and we understand the value that grassroots football for girls and women brings in affecting social change. And I wanted to pass the floor to Friederike to share a bit the experience of Discover Football. How do you make the most out of this process in Germany, and how your intervention is really shaping in the end how women are looked at in a mainstream society?
Yeah, we are like Discover Football is a women's rights and women's football organization, and we're based here in Berlin actually, but we work internationally. And what we try to do is like bring women or female footballers and female activists from all over the world together, that to share the stories, to share their knowledge. And what we experienced was that like there are a lot of similar stories. Like women all over face similar problems. Of course, they come together in a very, very great diversity, and they are not the same, but they face similar obstacles, and this is like where we start from. So we say, like, we want to raise awareness among women for all these different social, political, and economic issues that we can face within football, and so we do organize international encounters like festivals and conferences among players, activists, officials, journalists as well. Obviously, we also try to create visibility. We face the same obstacles that Caitlin was just mentioning, that you always, you have to live up to certain images, or like the images you send, they will be read or perceived in a specific way, and they will be judged in a specific way, especially when it's about women in male sports. Yeah, but what we try to do is like we try to strengthen and encourage each other in our commitment to women's rights.
Thank you very much. And since we're mapping best practices, I think it's a great opportunity for Vladimir to tell us a bit about the work in Russia, where which are the challenges for girls playing football, and how do you cope with these challenges?
We make our women football school, it's first women's school for adult women in Russia. We make it 3 years ago, and we make it...
Sorry, a little bit faster.
it was like more like experiment, not like a real business. So we've got kids football school, and we decided to make women football school because we had a possibility more for fun first, not for business.
И то, с чем мы столкнулись, то, что удивило нас больше всего, это то, что женщины действительно хотят играть в футбол.
And closer. I beg your pardon. Yeah, and what really inspired us, that the women are really want to play football, and it was something that we didn't expect actually, because at first lesson we've got 15 women, and in 2 months in summer we got 50, so huge difference just in 2 months.
And now we have more than 300 girls in school, and we have. We think that women football is not only a fight for rights. We think it's a very big opportunity for business and for federation. We think that women football can make a large market.
We think that the main thing that will change everything, change the feeling to the women football, is the money that women will start to spend to the epic, to the form, to the uniform, to all football stuff. So it comes from the women that make the first step to buy, and it will change the whole market, because now we have to. Yeah.
Last week I see final of women championship, Champions League. Yes, thank you. And it was an interesting match, but women football and men's football are different. It's I see it on TV, and like women's and men are different. It's normal. But there is a lot of sports that don't have TV translation, like marathons, like yoga, like fights, karate, or maybe something else. But it is popular. So what we think we must do is make women's football popular, not only professional, but in amateur class. So, and this will change situation that in League of Champions final there is not a lot of people on stadium.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Building on, I mean, women's football is clearly different, and it's what I think we should do is to see a lot of strength in this difference, and that's why I'm asking Shireen, what's your experience on building on this strength of women football, on the resilience that it brings, and on the challenges that women usually face in having access to this sport?
Thank you for that. Hello, everybody. I think one of the things for me that was most important as a footballer myself and I come from a South Asian background and a Muslim family. But my experience, as opposed to Ayisat, was that my family was very supportive of my athletics and my playing. Now, moving forward, I think even within smaller communities, we have to keep instilling the need for young girls and women to get involved in football, because at every level, whether it's grassroots, and I've experienced coaching in grassroots levels, I've experienced using football as a form of therapy for survivors of violence and refugees and newcomers. I think that women don't always see, and girls don't always see themselves represented in football. Now, the Women's World Cup only happens once a year, and although we love the Champions League finals, sometimes even on a global perspective, women don't find themselves, they don't see themselves in those players. And I think that's very important to note, because one of the biggest obstacles for these young women is definitely confidence and trying to work on that. And I think this can be really, really addressed at a grassroots level. Really important to do that development, but they lack funding, they lack societal support in some cases. I think resilience is a wonderful word, and it's what I use, and you have to keep telling them that they belong. Football is for everybody. It's not for just boys, it's not for men, and to make it an inclusive space, I think that for me this has always be key, to keep reminding them that, because inherently in any society around the world, and I'm based in North America, even here, boys are brought into the sports community with an inherent sense that they belong here. But that's not the case for girls. And there's so much that needs to happen on an emotional, psychological level for them as well, to ensure that they understand there is a place for you here. And you know what, I keep telling them, you have to go and grab that space. You love this sport. Essentially, this is, this is what it's for, it's for everyone. And I like to say that football is for all of us. It doesn't have a disclaimer that football is only for, young boys or men. It doesn't work like that, particularly when, in my experience, it can be used as such an incredible tool of healing, of community development and growth, of bridge building, of storytelling. And that's, for me, is such a powerful thing.
Shireen, thank you very much for pinpointing the universality of football and the impact it can have at community building and social change. And talking about the emotional and psychological positive effects you were mentioning earlier, recently UEFA released a research showing that football has incredible psychological and emotional benefits for girls. At the same time, we look, and this was also analyzed in comparison to other sports. So football, even more than other sports, can be beneficial for girls. On the other hand, we are talking about a sport where you have more presence, a prejudice more present than in any other field. How do you think we can somehow break this vicious circle, because girls and women can be discouraged by all the barriers they encounter in playing this sport?
That's such a huge question, and I, will also defer to any of the panelists as well on this. I'm so excited to see them here. I love Discover Football and Fairnet so much and the work that they do. And this is part of what it is, having grassroots organizations really commit to this. Girls face barriers and women face barriers at local, regional, and federal and international levels. And I think that we can't only pinpoint it because there's problems, and without naming any large federations that I think are hugely problematic. I think that it's important to keep that in mind as we move forward, and just keep moving forward and work around having. One of the biggest challenges I face in my work, and I work in the media, is having to circumvent people that are pushing back, and media plays a big part of this, and who is telling the stories. I think that that's also a really important point, to share the stories of those struggles so people are aware. Yes, there's a lot of great campaigns happening. I know FIFA does a lot of, empowerment projects, and so does UEFA, but also addressing the serious issues that people have. I think those stories are really important, and no two people's journey is the same. And I would love to hear what other folks think about this, because I think also working in conjunction with other organizations and showing solidarity and support for things, be it, misogyny or homophobia or transphobia or blatant racism that we still see. And let's not forget that when young women experience these types of things, it's always in layers. They're going to face misogyny with racism. They're going to face homophobia with all of those things. And I think to also be able to provide support, to help them survive that is important. And that's inherently what football can do, the act of playing. Like you said, UEFA released a report. But to be really honest with you, when I saw the report from UEFA, these are things that women have been saying for decades. We know this. We know this from our activism. We know this from our involvement in football. We know that football can help young girls, and we've been saying this. So I feel like some of the federations are really slow to catch up to what we've already been saying.
Thank you. This is very useful for our debate, and it shows the complexity of what football can do in terms of social change. And talking about intersectionality, in what are you doing at Discover Football to deal with all these issues? I mean,
oh, that's a huge question. What do we do in terms of like tackling also racism and homophobia combined with sexism and misogyny? It's not easy because we work internationally, as I said. So we work with a lot of different contexts. First of all, we bring women together and we try to find out what their concerns are. Like, it's not that we have a clear strategy, but we try to find out what are their issues, what do they do, what do they need, what do they want, what kind of discrimination do they face, what are relevant, what are not that relevant. And then we also have to look at the certain context, how we can address these issues. Because you cannot talk about homophobia in each context of the world in the same way, because it's a super, super dangerous topic for some people in some regions of the world. So, so there is no strategy. It's about, and also like when we talk about intersectionality, like as a Western NGO, I find it very, very complicated to come up with like a universal strategy, because we should not forget that like sports for development or using sport as a tool for political change has a very colonial history. And we must be very aware that we don't reproduce this history in, like, going to other places in the world and telling women how to behave and how to move and how not to move and what to do and what not to do. So this is not our task, because this is also, like, we have to think about that when we talk about intersectionality, of course. So, we should ask, like, all the players, all the activists in the world, like, how they want to do it and how we can support each other in doing that. So I would say when there is a strategy, then that is the strategy.
Thank you for underlying the participatory involvement of women in the development of football. Looking a bit into the future, in 2018, Vladimir, what do you think the World Cup will bring for women football in Russia?
It already brings something broad. The point is that we have a sport minister, and he already twice said something about women football. The first time I've heard it actually in post-Soviet Union, and a great step forward actually already. But no, World Championship do nothing to women football in Russia. accept the story that for 2 years it will be a bit more interested to the football, just football, not women or men. That's all.
При этом наш опыт показывает, что мужчины очень легко принимают женский футбол, когда сталкиваются с ним напрямую.
But we have an experience that men are easy going to women football. They accept it actually when they have a direct contact to women football. So when they see it directly, not somewhere in TV or somewhere, just directly.
Когда мы тренируемся всегда на площадках, где также присутствуют мужские команды на соседних площадках. И вначале мы сталкиваемся с понятными совершенно сексистскими шуточками и пренебрежительным отношением. Но проходит совсем чуть-чуть времени, и уже мужчины начинают с большим уважением относиться к женщинам, которые тренируются.
Yeah, we always have trainings on the fields. There are a lot of fields there, and for sure we're the only one women team training there. So all other teams are men teams. And when we first came there, for sure, we've heard a lot of sexist joke and all this joke about do we change T-shirts after the and so on, so some stupid things. And after a short time, we've got a new feeling, we've got a new situation. Usually when you get a ball from another side, from another field to your field, you've heard, hey boy, give me a ball please. No, hey girl, that's what we got.
И очень быстро мужчины начинают подходить, спустя всего совсем чуть времени мужчины начинают подходить и спрашивать, как могут ли они сюда привезти там жену, девушку, дочь, знакомую, кого угодно.
And after a short time we've played parallel, the guys are coming to us and asking, may I bring my girlfriend, daughter, mother, what else, whatever, may I introduce her to here? Yeah.
В качестве сравнения можно привести следующую историю. В Советском Союзе и России вождение машины было исключительно привилегией мужчин.
Yeah, we have a comparing example actually. In Soviet Union and after Soviet Union as well, the car driving was only man preference, not for women.
И когда в современной России женщины стали садиться за руль, это вначале встречалось с шутками и пренебрежением.
And when we first got women driving cars, we've heard a lot of jokes about it. And you could just drive with a taxi driver, and he's seeing women in front of him driving car as well, and he will say a lot of bad things about her driving, just jokes and so on.
Но очень быстро мужчины поняли, что гораздо выгоднее и удобнее, когда женщины умеют водить и водят машины.
But in a short time, men understood that it's much easier when their wives and their girlfriends are driving by themselves, not to driving them, but make them driving. And we think that with football it will be the same. That's what we think.
Thank you. What I take from this is that football is fighting against an entire system of prejudices against women, and it's contributing to challenging all these issues. Shireen, what do you think about U.S. women's team suing the U.S. FA? I mean, trying to do the same thing of challenging the system. Do you think there will be equal pay in football between women and men?
Would I like to see it happen? Yes. Do I think it can happen? Yes. But it's going to require a lot of mobilization and change within the upper echelons of governance of football. We need to see more women in football governance, which I think is really, really key here. In terms of the U.S. women specifically, it's really important to also remember that pay inequity in football wasn't only the U.S. women. They just got a lot of press about it. The same thing happened in Nigeria, and very few outlets actually covered the story. So we see that this is actually a global problem, that women are having to not only train to be professional athletes, they're having to pay out of pocket to do it. And this is such a problem. It's putting another burden on them to advocate for their own pay equity, to survive. And many, I know that the England women's, the Lionesses, the national team from England, those women all have full-time jobs. And we even see some of the women in the NWSL, the pro league in the States, they have to board with people because they don't earn enough to make a living wage, what's considered a living wage. And if we want to take this seriously, remuneration for women is a real thing. To say to women, well, you should just be lucky to play, you should just be lucky to be involved in the sport, it doesn't work like that. This is labor. This is real labor. This is women working in a system that can definitely afford to pay them. And it's really important to remember that. I mean, we hear the business side of things, how well, the International Federation does. It can definitely pay up. And as far as individual federations go, I've heard so many stories. I've heard stories from within the Asian Confederation of federations blocking potential tryouts for their players. Federations that should be supporting the ventures and the attempts of these players to go abroad to play in bigger and better leagues, and there's no support. I mean, they should be, in fact, elevating the game and helping their players. And I can't tell you, and it's in every continent that I've heard this. So that I've heard some type of story that not only is the player not getting paid, they have to pay out of pocket. So it poses an incredible burden on them. So the financial piece, I'm really glad you brought up, because it's a really big part of this. And, we see the men in different federations, and even so much as the cultures, the financial nod to them. Like, we have heard of men's teams traveling in first class while the women sit in coach. I mean, we're talking about the Japanese women's team sat in coach when the men and the Japanese women were world champions, but they were in economy and the men were in first class. So it's also, how do we treat our women? How do we look at them? Do we see them as in participatory members of society that can help? And I mean, let's not forget that and I like to repeat the stat a lot because it's very relevant. And for people that say women's football can't draw in the audience, the most watched football match in the history of the United States was the World Cup final in 2015 between the United States and Japan. So yes, there is an audience. Yes, we can do this. And we have to start deconstructing the current system to make that change.
Thank you, Shireen. Because you mentioned Nigeria, I wanted to ask Ayisat, how do you see the country you left in terms of understanding of the role of football in girls' development? How do you think your personal example affected a change, and what do you think shaped you in affecting this change?
Thank you very much. Personally, I think my role really changed a lot of things, most especially in my community and also in the state where I came from, in Lagos State. And also, most of the young players see me as a role model, and I'm still trying to do my best for them. And I totally agree with what Shireen said, because I think the FA should stop seeing most of the international players as just an athletes, because I believe they have a lot of potentials in them, but they are not given the right opportunities to prove what they can do or what they've got. Like the previous Nations Cup that was just concluded in Cameroon last year in Africa, where Nigeria won the championship. In the first place, most of the national team, the coaches are all men, and even when they know that most of all the international players have good quality, they can be the coaches of this. When it comes to women's championship or the tournament, I think they should give the women more chance, more opportunities, even encourage them to go for more courses like the coaching courses or the other aspects which women can handle. Because before the last Nations Cup, it was like kind of massive voice in Nigeria, like, okay, they want the women to be in charge and all that. And then the former national player, her name is Florence Omagbemi, she's based in America. She's a Nigerian international player, and she was the captain during her days. And then the FA refused to give her the chance to be a coach, but because there are a lot of voices and kind of protests and all that, so they gave her the chance to coach the national team, to take the girl to Cameroon. And there are 5 coaches, 5 technical crew, 4 women and one guy. And funny enough, they did extremely well. They played really fantastic football, and they won the Nations Cup, which give more women chances and opportunities, because they prove to the nation that what even the male coaches can do, the women can do better. But the question is that they are not given the chance and the opportunities. So if they could give more women the chances, and even for the local league or the regional league and the clubs, and when it comes to the women championship, they should try to empower more women and encourage them to do more. Because with more women in the involvement of the football and the sport generally, I think they're going to do a fantastic work. Because I believe it's going to work really well if they are given the chance and the opportunity to do so.
Thank you. And since you mentioned chances and opportunities, I am inviting the panelists to wrap up and conclude, saying which are 2 opportunities that we need to build on in the next years in order to reach the level of football development for women in such a way that will affect change at the level of the entire societies you work in. So go.
Wrap-up question. That's a very difficult question, but actually, yeah, I was thinking, like, also through the whole discussion, that maybe we should also broaden our way of thinking about the future of female football, because, like, we've been talking all the time about equality and quota and how we get to equality, but we forget about questioning equal to what, equal to whom, what is the standard, what's the ideal we try to reach. And when we look at, like, how football has been shaped, it has been shaped by heterosexual white male people. So they set the standard, and while we try to, I don't know, get a piece of the cake or get a seat at the table, we're so busy with doing that we stop questioning the table or the cake or the rules of the table. And this is why I think we should also allow ourselves to envision different futures that might go beyond equality, that might be able to think of a different football. So, because honestly, when I think about, like, what kind of football do I want, I do not want this kind of football that is promoted by the big federations. I mean, that is like, there's human trafficking, there's commodification of bodies, there is like a level of violence and I don't know, performance that is far beyond anything that is healthy. So do we actually want this kind of football? This is a question I would raise, and I would argue for looking at grassroots, grassroots women's football, because there we can see a huge variety of how football is played and how women shape the way they want to play football according to their needs, according to their wishes. And so I think it's very, very worth looking at how they do it and learn from how they do it.
First part, I think that women football will be regulated by the same people that regulates men football. White heterosexual men. But second part, women football is not to take a part from another cake, but make a new one. And the first thing that we have to do is to make the man that rules the women football believe that women football can exist, actually, that it should be, and not just because this man's rules, but just because there are a lot of women that believe this man's. Because still we won't show to the old people that women football is attractive. Women football is can be just a woman football. It will stay under the man football. So, yeah, standards, exactly. Yeah, it's a main thing that we do.
Mm-hmm. So I'll give the floor to Shireen to tell us 2 things to move us forward. You're experiencing.
2 things to move forward. I just want to say I love everything Friederike said, and I echo it in terms of the people making decisions at policy levels are always white, able-bodied, privileged men, and that's really problematic because they don't interact with the grassroots football community of women where there is so much potential and power. So I would say one solution is to like she said, question everything and insert women, and as best as we can, because even the structure by which to elect and get women is also flawed inherently and not inclusive. So figure out a way to have women in there and keep encouraging them. Also something Ayisat said about having women in coaching and playing, because if girls don't see themselves represented at different levels, you can't imagine what you can't see. And we know this, and there are trailblazers, and there are women who just pushed forward without anything to look to and tried to create that change. But there are literally hundreds of thousands of young girls and women involved in football around the world, locally, even on a pitch somewhere in the community. And this really counts, to see women in different terrain, in different communities, just enjoying the sport. This is really what it's about, and we can't get lost in this mega corporate machismo world of football. So the second thing I would say is to keep building grassroots programs for girls and supporting them. And because even at very young levels, the support that girls get at local clubs is very different. And to be very honest, the pay-to-play system in most places is not accessible for young girls coming from challenged socioeconomic communities. It's simply not, which is why we see in the United States and parts of Europe, it becomes a sport for upper middle class white kids, white girls essentially. So even be able to create spaces where they can excel, because it's like a chicken and egg situation. If you don't develop young girls at the grassroots level and give them the supports they need, they won't get to the upper echelons. And just one thing I wanted to add, that even in the highest leagues, women suffer from issues. Like Emma Hayes, who's the Chelsea manager, came out a couple weeks ago and said she was really frustrated with the lack of trained officials that league was given, and it's some of the best football in the world, women's football. And to train, I think training young girls to be officials, to be managers, to getting them in all aspects of the game, not just playing, in the offices, in the managerial positions. So actually, I'm sorry, I know I'm supposed to only have 2, but I have 3.
Okay, thank you. Ayisat, conclusions? two things that are necessary to move forward in the development of women's football, from your perspective?
Firstly, I think the grassroots really matters a lot, because it's always good to start when you're doing things and you're really young, and you get more encouragement, more motivation, and also get to know much about the technical, the skill, the tactics aspect, like kind of from simple to complex. And also, I think they should create more awareness with the younger team, like the local team and the grassroots, before the top level, because somehow when you play in the top level, you ignore most of the things. But when it comes to like the grassroots, is always like you want to like do your best, you want to put in your effort, and you want to be motivated. And also, I think the government on the FA of every countries and locally level or regional level should try to create more awareness, like in terms of advertisement, sponsors, and try to let these girls feel that they can do what they want to do, and without any barriers or any kind of sexism or gender equalities. So and for the player as well, I'm not talking about the grassroots, I'm talking about the player that play in the top level or player that really want to be like play professional level. You should have self-confidence, you should be determined, you should be dedicated, and also devoted in what you're doing. Just keep that, because consistency really matters a lot in what you're doing. If you do something and maybe at the end of the day you don't get what you want as a result, you just want to like let it go. Just keep doing what you know how to do best, because at the end of the day, something good is going to come out from there.
Thank you very much to everybody who participated. I think this is a starting point for many other debates, and cutting will be, as we defined very specific issues. Though I support and I'm involved in grassroots football, I think, because I'm very moderate, that we need to find a way to turn around the table in such a way that grassroots people and the football governing bodies could talk in a way that can bring about change for everyone. But this can be a topic for our next debate. Thank you very much, everyone, and looking forward to see you at our next debate. Thank you.